Hi friends, this is Mr. Sanjay Kuwar. Welcome back for learning 7th standard history subject. Now in this video we are going to learn some of the topics of lesson number first, sources of history. So let's begin the lesson with its introduction. Dear friends, Indian history is divided into three parts. Which are they? First, ancient Indian history. The second one is medieval Indian history. And the third one is modern Indian history. Dear friends, in the last year, it means in the 6th standard, you have already studied ancient Indian history. In this ancient Indian history, you have got the information about different things. They are such as when it was started, when it was ended, the different rulers of this ancient period, the different religious trends, the customs and traditions of the people, the different civilizations, etc. All such a different points we have studied in the last year, in the 6th standard. Now, in this year, we are going to study medieval Indian history. The history of medieval India. Throughout the whole year, we are going to study. And in the next year, it means in the 8th standard, we will study the modern history of our country. So, dear friends, throughout the whole year, we are going to study the history of medieval India. Dear friends, what is the period of the medieval Indian history? The period of the medieval Indian history begins from the 9th century and it ends with the 18th century. This is the period of the medieval Indian history. It begins with the 9th century and it ends with the 18th century. This is considered to be the period of the medieval Indian history. Now dear friends, let's understand what is history. In the last year, we have studied the definition of history. We studied that history is a coherent account of the past event. We know that in the history subject, we study the past events. So, in simple terms, we can say that history is the record of the past events. In this year, we will study another important definition of history. So, let's understand it. What is history? History is a chronological, scientific and systematic account of the past event. This is the definition of history in this year which we have to study and remember. Let's study it. History is a chronological. What does it mean? Chronological, it means in the correct order of occurrence. Here in the history, we know that there are the different events occur time to time. The first event occur, then after that the second event, and after that the next event. In this way, all the different events are recorded chronologically. It means in the correct order. Next, scientific. All the different events are recorded in a scientific way, in a scientific manner. We know that in the science, we need the proofs. In the same way, in this history subject also, there are the proofs or the evidence. So, that is scientific. And systematic account. Here, all these events are recorded in a systematic way. In this way, this is the definition of history. What is it? Let's repeat it. History is a chronological, scientific and systematic account of the past event. Now dear friends, let's understand the 4 factors of history. There are 4 important factors of history. They are individuals, society, place and time. They are very important for studying history. Here, individually, the particular person, history is recorded. For example, a king or a queen or a common man. Society, people live in the group, that is the society. Next, place, where did the event take place, that is also important. And the last one is time, when the event had happened. All these 4 factors are very important for studying the history, and history is written on the basis of all these 4 factors. Now dear friends, let's understand what are called the sources of history. Here the word sources, what does it mean? Source means origin. In science subject, we studied the sources. Here, example, what is the source of the solar energy? We can give answer, that is the sun. The sun is the source of solar energy. In the same way, in history subject, there are also sources of history. They are very important as far as the particular past event is concerned. Here, let's understand what are called the sources of history. History is based on authentic evidence or proofs. These proofs are called as sources of history. History is based on the authentic. Authentic means real. Proofs or the evidences. That proofs or the evidences are nothing but the sources of history. For example, there are forts, coins, monuments and different documents which are available. So these are the examples of the sources of history. These all the different sources of history provide us the basic information about the particular event or the particular thing. That's why these sources of history are studied, evaluated, and it is necessary to take precaution while writing history with the help of these all the sources of history. Because the sources of history which are available in the past, they may be real or they may not be real. That's why such a source of history should be checked time to time. We can't say, for example, the document which is available from the past, we can't say that the document is authentic only because it is old. That's why we have to see whether the sources of history are authentic, means real or not. There is need to examine critically all the sources of history, and after that only we can use them for the study of history. Now let us move on to the next point, that is classification of the sources of history. The sources of history are classified into three types. They are, first, material sources of history, the second one is written sources of history, and the third one is oral sources of history. Now we will study one by one all these three kinds of the sources of history. Let's get information about material sources of history. Material sources of history is also called as the physical sources of history. What is called material source of history? Let's see it. Artifacts, articles, monuments or their ruins are called as material sources of history. These material sources of history are very important for studying the history. There are different examples of material sources of history. They are forts, memorials, buildings, cave sculptures, inscriptions, coins, copper plates, etc. These are called as the material sources of history. Let's understand them. Among all the material sources of history, forts have important place. Forts have important place among all the material sources of history. There are some major kinds of forts. They are sea forts, hill forts, forest forts, and forts on the plain. These are the major kinds of the forts. Examples of sea forts: Sindhudurg and Vijayadurg are the examples of sea forts. Daulatabad Fort and Pratapgarh Fort are the examples of hill forts. And the examples for the forest forts are Shivneri and Panhala. Next, Purandar is the example of the forts on the plain. Next material source is the monuments. Here monuments are the structures built in that particular period. These monuments include samadhis, graves, virgala and buildings. Here samadhi means the state of deep concentration and meditation at the time of the death. It is believed that Sant Dhaneshwar had entered into the samadhi. Next one is grave. It is the place where the dead body of the person is buried. Here virgala, it is the martyr's stone. After the accidentally death of a person, the people believed that the soul of that person wanders here and there. To get him or her stable at one place, to get him free from that process, people used to build or paint the pictures of that person on the stone, or they give shapes to the particular stone. Such a martyr's stone are kept on the ground. They are called virgalas. You can observe in the pictures also. And the last one is the buildings. Buildings includes the palaces of the queens and kings, ministerial mansions, queen's quarters, that is Rani Vasa, and the houses of the common people are the examples of buildings. Here they are all the examples of the material sources of history. Dear friends, these all the sources of history provide us the particular information about that particular period. If you look at them, you will come to know many different things, such as you will understand the art of that period, the architecture of that period, and the people's standard of living. These are all the things we can easily understand while looking at all such a different material sources of history.